Hello friends, my name is Inés, and this is a book review and a discussion. We're going to be talking about To Gaze Upon Wicked Gods by Molly X. Chang. So it's been a little while since my last video, and usually I come on here and I'm like, I haven't been here, I've been over on TikTok, but I haven't been on TikTok either. Things have been incredibly busy to the point that I'm annoying myself because I am becoming one of those people that is just like, I'm so busy. But I'm not saying that with any sort of pride. I genuinely hate how busy that I am currently. Work is really intense for me right now. Plus, I'm planning BookNet Fest, which is happening May 24th and May 25th in Orlando, and I am working with Bindery, and I am like this close to selecting my manuscript to publish. So like it's a lot going on at once, and these videos have fallen by the wayside. Here and on TikTok, you know where I have been posting videos? Over for my Bindery. For my members over on Bindery, they have the chance to follow along with my publishing journey. So they're watching me as I'm reading manuscripts and selecting manuscripts, and then once I have one selected, they'll get exclusive content with the author and just get to see, like I said, the entire journey. However, if you are unable to support and become a member, you can still follow my Bindery for free and you will get updates. And plus, I'm planning on like an exclusive sort of video for my members and my free followers. It's not behind a paywall, but it will live on Bindery. So, you know, just that little plug. I really, more than anything, is like, I promise I have been making some things. It just has lived over there. Also really like hesitated to make this video because it is going to be a 1-star review. And I can already hear the people who wish they could give me 1 star on Goodreads, like, you don't like anything, you're so negative, and just it is what it is. If you love this book, if you don't want to engage with the discourse around this book, which honestly it's been a lot, just feel free to like skip this one too. I haven't been around here anyways. Catch me in another 3 months. Okay, so I'm going to give a little bit of context here for me reading this book, and then I will go into a pretty brief, I imagine, sort of overview of like what I thought of the book. But then I will jump into like talking about the things that have been said about this book specifically, and I will need to use spoilers or like at least plot specifics, book specifics to do so. So that will be the final half. All of that will be marked clearly in the description. Starting off with how this book got on my radar. This is not going to be like a reporting thing. I'm not going to break down everything that happened online. I really just want to give context to like me reviewing this. I talk about this all the time in terms of like no review is objective. All reviews are subjective, and one of the ways or one of the reasons that they are subjective is we bring all of our biases and all of our like baggage and all of that like pre-reading stuff to our reading experience. And so the best that a reviewer can do is to be transparent and to talk about like what those things are. So I heard, along with like pretty much everybody else on the bookish internet, about this whole Kate Corain situation and the like pages of receipts and like all of that going down, and I mostly just like followed along online. I mean I did try to like step my toe into the discourse. Specifically, I was having a really hard time with all of the ableist language that people were using and they felt good about using because Kate Corain is a bad person. And so there was so much ableism on my timeline, and I like stepped in to correct some of it, and that went poorly. And then over on TikTok, like I think after like most of it had passed, I talked a little bit about like punitive justice within bookish spaces and like what it would look like to have restorative justice and what it would look like to have an abolitionist lens to like people who have done bad in our community. I mean, this is something like really interesting to me. I think back to like when I started making videos and even like some of the ways that I have approached discourse, and that was definitely also from like a more punitive like sort of standpoint. And it's taken my own abolitionist journey to like have seen the Kate Corain situation happen and go, you know, there's something about that, and it has nothing to do with who Kate Corain is as a person or me excusing Kate Corain's actions or anything like that. I'd even like say like, hey, we shouldn't have done that. I just like posed the question of like, what does it mean to approach these things from the lens of abolition? And that also went really poorly. But that was kind of the end of me wading into that discourse. I did follow along. I talked about it a lot with my Discord. And then there were a couple of books that Kate Corain had targeted to give the sock puppet account reviews and 1 stars and downvotes to, that then got put like on my radar for my TBR. Even though I found out about them through this whole thing, like these were the 3 that stuck out to me of like, oh, I would actually be interested in reading that. Number 1 was Red Sight by Meredith Mooring. Number 2 is So Let Them Burn by Camila Cole. And number 3 was To Gaze Upon Wicked Gods by Molly X. Chang. In fact, we have a buddy read of Red Sight going on in my Discord right now, and we had talked, like, people had talked about a few different titles that they wanted to read. These were the 3 that I had my eyes on. Now, after the like initial wave of this Kate Corain situation, Kate Corain like went away for a very short amount of time and then came back and gave an interview, so people were talking about it again. And it was around that like second time that people were talking about Kate Corain that I started to see tweets saying that it was happening again, that there were sock puppets that were like badly reviewing or badly rating some of these affected books. I think I mostly saw this about Chang's book, about To Gaze Upon Wicked Gods, that it was being attacked again. That has spiraled over the last couple of weeks. So there were a couple of reviews on this book that accused this of being a colonizer romance. Like a lot of them that I saw that were critical, that were 3, 2, and 1 star reviews sort of like at this point, did talk about why. Like there were more reasons. It wasn't just like the ones that I saw, colonizer romance 1 star, but like talking about how this was a colonizer romance was part of a larger sort of review. But it turns out that one of the reviewers was like reviewing under like it was an anonymous account. Like it wasn't a sock puppet account because like they had reviewed other things. It was their account, they just didn't put their name to it, and that person was a sister to another 2024 debut person. So it's like the sister of a debut author rated this book 1 star, and it became a whole thing again of accusations. And separately, Molly X. Chang is being harassed and she's being attacked and she's being threatened. And so like the lines between what is a negative review and what is harassment and an attack, like, I mean, those things are very clear, but they started to get fuzzy because in this conversation, like those 2 things kept being sort of mixed. The harassment that she was receiving and these like critical reviews that she also received that, you know, people maybe didn't agree with, whether or not this was a colonizer romance, whether or not it was good or bad or what have you. And seeing all of this, I got even more interested in reading this book. It was already on my radar, but I was like, oh, I really want to see where this is. And in my head, it was from the perspective of like, oh no, not again, because it reminded me of what happened with The Sun in the Void. So this was a book that I saw some reviews of that were like, it's racist and it's problematic, and I was like, I don't know, let's check it out. And when I read it, it wasn't like the best book I had ever read. It had some weaknesses, and I think those weaknesses in construction and storytelling maybe weakened some of what it was attempting with its message, but I thought it was like incredibly clear that it wasn't like a racist book. It was a book that was like depicting racism, and that racism that it depicted, it was like very clear, was like bad for our characters. They were not happy in the situations that they were, and even the ways that they had internalized some of what like society had done to them. It felt like very clear that it was like, oh, this is also bad. The ways that they are now passing on these prejudices to the people around them, or believing the lies that society had said about to them. Like all of those things that they were being explored and not necessarily condoned. And from The Sun in the Void, and like reading that, and it took me a long time, and I really read it carefully, and I did a review somewhere. I think it's in a vlog in somewhere, and doing a review, I decided to do build a panel for BookNet Fest called Depiction versus Endorsement, to talk about like what it means for something to depict a subject versus endorse a subject. And as reviewers and readers, like what we're looking for in terms of like messaging or the way that these things are handled, to like make those lines between like, oh, okay, this is saying something versus this is approving something, you know, or anything along those lines. So I read The Sun in the Void. I I was like, I want to talk about this. I made that panel for BookNet Fest. All of this stuff happened with Kate Corain. And then when like this conversation was happening about whether or not this was a colonizer romance or whether or not it was enemies to lovers or this was anti-colonialism, I was like, oh, maybe this is like the sun in the void again. And so that's where I went into the book. You know, there are books sometimes that I'm like, I'm not gonna like this, or books that I'm like, I'm gonna love this. And this one I was like ready to defend almost, even though like a lot of like the discourse surrounding it was like so messy to me, and it feels like a lot of it was like interpersonal, and it just kind of keeps bleeding out into the book community as a whole, is my general impression. But I felt like there was a chance that this was trying to do something or say something or explore something, and that was being missed. I know I'm not sure that I feel that way entirely anymore. Before we get into like why, I do want to say that I've seen a lot of like contention about like what kind of book this is. First of all, is it YA or is it an adult book? And people being really upset with like talking about this as a YA book because it is an adult book, and like the expectations of those two things are different. This book is published by Del Rey in the US, which is typically an adult imprint. However, in the UK, it is published as YA. So at the very least, this has crossover appeal. The main character is 19, I believe, so again, just on that border of like what a protagonist usually is between YA and adult. And to me personally, it read very heavily like YA, so I understand why people who are reading it also get that vibe as well. So my point here is that I don't feel like it's so cut and dry of like people calling this YA are just doing it to like put Molly down, or because like people do this to women in fantasy or whatever. Even in the way that Molly was like marketing this, was pulling from things like Harry Potter and Avatar: The Last Airbender as like comp titles, especially for some of the ships in there. And so like, again, to me, it's not so cut and dry. It's obviously being muddied by the way that it's being published and marketed, and for me personally, by the way that it read. The other thing that I saw was people saying, well, it can't be a colonizer romance because it's not a romance. We will get into whether or not I feel like this was colonizer romance like in the review itself, but I just wanted to point out that the way that the author herself was marketing this was with like hashtag enemies to lovers, Zutara on steroids, hashtag villain romance. And so a lot of that makes it confusing that people are like insisting that it's not the way that the author herself sort of positioned it. So this was one of those experiences that like within a few pages I was like, oh, like this is actually really bad. And reviews like this, I really like to share examples of the text and like things that I'm seeing, but I read an arc, and it's usually bad practice to share quotes from the arc because things might still be changed. And honestly, this was a pretty messy arc. I felt like with some of the formatting and some typos and just editing things, like there were a lot of things here that I felt like still needed to be tightened and fixed. And not even from a larger like editing style perspective, like I felt like this was badly edited, but I also felt that this was like badly copy edited. And so there's a chance that some of that might still be fixed, that I saw a early enough version of the arc that it could be cleaned up for publishing. And a lot of those things, like I took a lot of pictures of things that I was just like, huh? And trying to understand what was being said, but it doesn't feel entirely fair to like share those with you because again, there's still chance for those things to be fixed. But apart from like the copy editing sort of thing, I do feel like generally this could have been better edited. It's been quite a while since I read prose that felt this like burdened under itself. This was incredibly like metaphor and simile heavy. Like every other line, it was just like another metaphor, and there was so much repetition that it became actually painful for me to read this. It is so redundant that you could cut out every other line and make this book half as long. Like just by cutting out every other line, you wouldn't lose any sort of meaning at all, because that is how redundant all of this is. Every single thing is spelled out to you in a way that just made such an unpleasant reading experience for me. And it wasn't like a reading level thing again, and it wasn't like it would make something pretty and flowery and then explain it, which is kind of annoying, but you know, different than what this was that was just redundant. There was so much repeated information. It is one of those things that just makes like a miserable reading experience for me. And so that was from go. From like the opening pages, I was like, oh no, I just don't think it was very good. And like it unfortunately got kind of worse as we went on from there. I think that there are so many holes in this world and world building that unfortunately leave it open to all of this criticism about like colonizer romance, and like the places where there could have been some sort of acknowledgement or some exploration of like what it means to be the colonized. It's so empty because the world building just sort of stops making sense. I honestly had so many what the heck moments while reading this, and I don't think that any of the elements are well considered in terms of how they are used within the plot. We'll get into that in more detail, but I just also wanted to put, in addition to the writing, that the world building I thought was lacking a lot, and then I thought that the characters were also lacking a lot. I felt like, I mean, this world also felt incredibly underpopulated. Like the main character had people around her. She had a best friend, a childhood best friend, a sister, a grandma, but we see so little of them, and we see so little of like anybody else in the world. Even when they're present, they feel so flat that it's like, where is everybody? It just felt like such an empty world to me, and that really put the focus on both the main character and the colonizer slash villain slash romantic love interest. I mean, and that's what he is for a large portion of the book. So there's so much focus on these two characters because the world is weak and supporting characters are like barely there, barely present at all. I had such a hard time following along and being invested with the main character. People talk about these being morally gray characters a lot, and how the main character is doing bad things, but she's doing it to protect her family. And I think, I'm pretty sure in the author's note there's this air of like, I hope you will like understand that she's doing bad things, but for a good reason. Like she you know, there is that like that conflict, right, that's supposed to be built in between what we're seeing this character do and like understanding her motivations. But I just never felt like I understood those motivations. I mean, at the surface level, she is protecting her family, right? If she does bad things, then her family will be protected. But that is like pretty much all you get, because the moment you look even a layer beyond that, it just stops making sense that any of this would happen in this way, or that like the things that our main character was doing would actually at all protect her family. Like if she thought about it at all, she would be like, how would this even protect my family? It like, that's the level of just like, this is all of the motivation that we got, is just bad things protect family over and over and over again. And even within that parameter, her behavior was so inconsistent that it was hard to like be led through what was otherwise a weak story by this character, because I couldn't invest in her because there was like very little consistency in what she was doing. And by virtue of like the story that she's in, that she's like serving this oppressor, she has very little agency. So it's like little agency, little motivation, little consistency. So there just wasn't very much to the main character in a story that really needed something to anchor it. I think that's about as much as I can say without getting into specifics of the plot. I will say that it took me forever to finish this. I started reading it weeks ago and I read a portion of it pretty fast, and then from there I was reading like 2 pages at a time, and I would like reach my limit, and my motivation, people are gonna hear that and be like, well, why did you finish it? Like, I wanted to have this discussion particularly about like colonizer romances and like what I found here, and so I was like motivated to finish it. I wanted to have this discussion, but like the experience of reading it, I could only like read a few pages at a time, and then I'd just be like so over it. I finally last night was like, like, that's it. Like, no sleep till I finish it. And honestly, I did not expect that it would like get worse right at the end. And it did. I was genuinely like upset by the way that this ended. And so that's the final piece that I will say. There wasn't really nothing here that I could say as a positive for me. I think it was badly written, badly edited, badly constructed in terms of its world and its characters. I think a lot of the plot beats just felt like very convenient. Like the number of times that I would just be like, oh, okay, well, that's convenient. It just kind of like didn't have any strong through line. There was nothing sort of carrying me through. And then that last, you know, let's say 20 to 30% of the book was like painfully bad to me because of the way that it ended. A lot of the ways that I was trying to give this the benefit of the doubt, and a lot of the ways that I was trying to reason like some of the things that might have been explored, to me just felt like they were super negated, at least in their messaging towards the end. So that's why I gave this book 1 star regardless. And I feel like I have to make this entirely clear if I haven't already, but nobody should be bullying this author. Nobody should be bullying any reviewers. I do not stand for any bullying or harassment. I also believe that once you publish a work, like that work is open to interpretation, it is open to review, and so like negative reviews of this work are not harassment, are not bullying. And I think that ultimately there are really valid reasons to critique this book, both in its quality and I think also in its messaging. So if you don't want to hear any spoilers, that's kind of like the end of that, and I'm going to jump into the spoiler section now. I think the best way to sort of approach this is to give you a little recap of what happens in the story, like as best as I can. So we're in this world that's being colonized, and the people who are colonizing this country, I'm already like second guessing myself here because it is at the very beginning of the story, it is so difficult to understand where we are and if we are in a country and if there are other countries, or if this like entire planet is just this one empire. There is no sense of the world. And even like towards the end, we do meet like the emperor of another country, I guess, but it's still so unclear in my head what is actually happening in this place, this planet, whatever it might be. So anyways, the people who are colonizing this place are called the Romans, right? The Romans are here and they're colonizing this place. And so of course you're like, what are the Romans doing here in this fictional, in this fantasy place? And like that is a bit of confusion for a while. Now, the Romans have brought with them, in addition to like advanced weapons and war, they've also brought opium, which is kind of like opium, but fantasy. And so a lot of the people of Erlang are addicted to the Romans' opium. So our main character, Ru Ying's father, has died from an addiction, and her sister is also addicted to opium. They live with their grandmother. Their father has passed away, so they're 3 women. They aren't very safe, especially because their city is very close to like, I guess, the wall, where like the Romans are on the other side. On top of all of that, our main character has magic. Some people in this world are born with different magical abilities, but they are told that if they use it, they will eventually die. It's like pulling at their own life force in order to use this magic. And our main character specifically has death magic. So when she was young, she accidentally killed one of her playmates. And so from that time on, she's been a little bit isolated by other people. People are scared of her magic, but she also doesn't use it. She can't really control it because she hasn't practiced with it. She mostly just kind of tries to ignore it, but she can feel death. She can kill people. She can suck them of their chi, their life force. At the beginning of the story, she sees a Roman man on her side of the wall, and he basically drops his money bag, and Rui decides to just like steal it and run. And she's chased by this man's guard, so she uses her death magic to like knock him out. She doesn't kill him, and she keeps running. So of course, like the Roman guy is like, cool magic, and eventually like kidnaps her back. She's wounded and she's kept in a cell, and this is part of the way that he ends up manipulating her and to using her magic to serve him. And so the agreement that they eventually come to is that he will protect Ru Ying's family, her sister and her grandmother, if she becomes his assassin. And so he just basically picks people for Ru Ying to kill, and she does, all because she wants to keep her family safe. Not only to protect her family, I think this is part of the reason that the author confuses a lot of what is going on, because if it was just like, I will protect my family, but the other part of it is that this Roman prince like swears up and down that he is actually on their side, right? He doesn't want to kill all of Ru Ying's people. He wants, like, that's his evil grandfather and that's his evil brother who are gonna do more mass murder. He wants to keep the peace as long as possible. So if he's crowned the emperor after his grandfather, he's going to be so much better of a colonizer than like his evil grandpa or his brother. And so Ru Ying is like, oh my gosh, wow, you must be telling the truth. And I wish I were exaggerating in terms of like how quickly she's just like, yeah, I totally believe in this. It is that quick of a switch, especially because in the beginning she spends so much time telling us how bad the Romans are and how like miserable her life is. But she meets this one guy and he's like, no, I promise I'm not trying to kill you. And she's like, oh, yeah, sure, I'll kill for you. So that's like a very quick flip for our main character. And then we just jump ahead 6 months. We just jump, there's like you turn the page and it's like 6 months went by and I killed 48 people. And that is almost a direct quote. And so it's just like, wait a second. Lazy passages of time like annoy me anyways. But the reason that this is like particularly bad is because there is an argument here that this is not a colonizer romance. And what this actually is this man manipulating this woman, right? And like he manipulates her in different ways in terms of their relationship and like getting her to trust him and getting her to believe he's doing bad for the greater good, right? And that sort of like manipulation. As we go on through the story, you do see more of this where he's like kind of highlighting or like preying on her feelings of like how nobody else understands her. People fear her death magic, but he sees her, he understands her. And that is very like classic like manipulator isolation sort of tactics. And so it's like, okay, like I can see where the author was going for, even though she kept calling this villain romance and enemies to lovers and whatnot. I see baked into the story that there was that sort of manipulation, and there were people around Ru Ying who would be like, girl, he is lying to you. The work itself was doing the work in order to counter what the like this love interest character, this villain character was doing, right? There was explicitly people being like, no, he's a liar, he's a bad guy, and you need to open your eyes. So I was like, okay, all right, countering this whole like situation with like the love interest with the colonizer. But part of what weakens that is that you jump over the part where that manipulation would have mostly happened. We don't actually get to see what happens to bring Ru Ying, the character that we meet at first, who's like, boo Rome, like they've destroyed my life. Like 2 of my family members are like addicted to this drug because of them. There's like war, and like that character to become the one that is like, and his jade green eyes sparkled, and every time I looked at him, the warmth in my body, like there literally all there was to bridge us between those 2 things is like a page flip and a time jump. And so I don't think that whatever it was trying to do, it did it effectively, because it cut out the piece where we would have been like effectively told that. And so what you're left with are all of these like sort of like romantasy tropes, or all of these enemies to lover sort of tropes of like feeling tingles when he looks at her, and like, you know, almost touching, the hands almost touching, and the way he looks at her, and all of this stuff without a foundation. So we're just kind of left with this. We're just left with the pieces that look awfully like a colonizer romance. So we jump ahead. She's working as this assassin for him. What happens next? Oh, I forgot to tell you who the Romans are. Maybe you're thinking like I am, like, why are there Romans in this fantasy world? So this is why people are like science fantasy, because like the Romans came in through a portal from the sky. They flew their planes, because there's planes and like weapons of mass destruction and stuff in this world. They flew their planes from like some version of like a world that looks more like ours. Like the way I've seen it described is like our world, except for if like the Roman Empire never fell. And so our world, just a lot from our world, but apparently the Roman Empire never fell. They like polluted the heck out of our planet. And so in trying to find like solutions, they like cut a portal into this other world and now are like terrorizing this other world in a number of different ways to like find a solution for the planet that they polluted to death. So it's like at one point I was like, the Romans are aliens, because there were portals happening, and the explanation was like fed out in a way that it was just very confusing for a long time. And even saying that, it still sounds a little bit confusing, but whatever. Alternate universe Romans come into this like other world because climate change, I suppose. So that's where we are. She's working for him, and she's just killing people. And she has a lot of feelings about like killing people, you know, because sometimes they're good people and she doesn't understand why he's making her kill these people. But he's also like saying, like, you know, continuing to be like, I trust you, you know, trust me. And like they get closer and closer until she basically becomes like his right hand. He's been like keeping her in magic chains this whole time that dampen her magic, and so he finally like sets her free from the chains as like a sign of trust, and she just like is like cool and stays there with him. What else happens? At one point, her next assignment is to go with him to where he's going to go sign a treaty with an emperor of a neighboring land, but her job is to kill the emperor. And she's like, why? You're gonna sign a treaty. Why would I kill the emperor? And his explanation, I swear to God, I like sat there for so long trying to do the math, and like this book made me feel so stupid at times, because I was like, am I just not understand? Is it me or is it the book? But the explanation given is that if this man signed the treaty and then died, then his like son would feel really, really obligated to uphold the treaty. Even though his son was younger and more volatile and more anti-Rome, it was better to have the volatile young son on the throne feeling like he had to uphold like his father's dying wish than just having the father who signed the treaty continue to live. And like there were so many, like maybe it's like a cultural thing, right? Like where the last dying wish of like a parent is like really sacred, but like that, maybe that's true, but that wasn't explained. And even if it like came up suddenly where it came up, again, that's just like incredibly convenient to like just be here and be like, oh yeah, this thing where like if he's the last guy to sign a treaty and then we kill him and it's perfect. And that didn't even happen. That would have been convenient, but at least explained. It just like they kept arguing about like how he needed to die because I don't know that he needed to die, but Ru Ying finally was like, I can't kill him. Like she's killed like 50 other people, but she's finally like, I can't kill him. And she's starting to have all of these like, I don't know, now like hesitations about like killing her own people, and like maybe the colonizer doesn't have her best interest, and nothing again really like tips this over the edge. It wasn't like a slowly building thing or something that was satisfying. It was just like, kill the emperor, I can't. And it was just like, okay, now we're doing this or whatever. So she tries to warn the emperor. Oh, and during all of this, there is a group of rebels who are trying to fight off the Romans. And so at first, she thinks that her childhood best friend, who was kind of like a love interest, a little love interest when they were young, and who clearly still has feelings for her, like she thought that he was working for the Romans, but it turns out that he's like double crossing. And so he is associated with this rebel group. He finds her and is like, you need to like help us because we want to kidnap your guy, your prince oppressor over there. Like we I don't know, we got rebel things to do and we need to kidnap him. And she's like, I won't let you hurt him. I won't let you hurt him. Like, again, why? I don't know. Just like romantasy reasons, enemies to lovers reasons, right? So at the mission where she's supposed to kill the emperor, what ends up happening is the rebels end up attacking them to try and kidnap Prince Oppressor. And like they both get hurt and they end up like on the, they were, this is like the ocean country, I guess. And they end up like stranded, marooned on a shore somewhere, and they have to share only one bed. So, you know, if you were wondering, yes, they do indeed share only one bed, and they have this whole moment of like, if we were in like different, if you weren't you and I weren't me, like we could be something, like there was actual chemistry there. So very, very heavy on the romance between these two characters, one who is a colonizer and one who is the colonized. So they share their whole moment in bed, and then so they get caught by the rebels, and he's like, no, he like sacrifices himself, like puts his life on the line for her multiple times. Like, one, he steps in front of an arrow, and two, he tells her to run, and rather than be captured, he like stabs himself in the stomach. But Ru Ying comes back, and like just there, and conveniently his people find him, his guards find him and take him back home and heal him. You maybe remembered that I said that she like realized like, oh my God, he's actually a bad colonizer, and what he really wants is war. He makes his like a passing statement about like, oh yeah, because if we do this if we kill the emperor and they uphold the treaty, then I can win the war. And she's like, oh, you told me you wanted peace. And he's like, what can I say? And then so you're like, oh, she finally has seen the light, that he is like a bad man colonizer. But then that happens, and then the one bed trope is happening afterwards, and then she's like, no, I will never leave him. After that, he's recovering from his gut wound, and the childhood best friend finds her again and is like, you need to know what is happening. That man has you fooled. Like, you didn't even let us kidnap him. We weren't gonna even kill him. We just needed to kidnap him to question him, and like, you are defending him. You have no idea what's going on. And she's like, fine, what's going on? The hilarious thing about this is that people have told her what's going on no less than 5 times before we got to this point. I swear to you. Like, first of all, okay, so I'll tell you what's going on and then tell you how we knew this all along, because this is built up as a reveal of like, oh no, he's actually worse than we think. Like, the murderer colonizer is actually worse than we think. Like, it was fine. He was morally gray before, I guess, but like now he's really, really bad. So the childhood best friend takes her to where she was being held when she was injured way back in the beginning of the book, and it ends up being like a laboratory, because the author herself told us in the author's note that this was partially based on her family history and Unit 731. So the Prince Colonizer has been doing human experimentation on these people. And so the childhood best friend is like, human experimentation, that's what he's doing. And this entire scene literally made me livid, because it does not at all sort of focus in on the point that there's like experimentation going on, and one that she very specifically, the author very specifically connected to Unit 731. She made that connection. And so we are brought to the scene where, to be clear, I don't want to be like explained in graphic detail what's going on, but it is so sanitized. It is just, and the thing that we focus on the entire time is the person that they are experimenting on is her best friend. Her best friend is a soldier. We like met her briefly, but then she gets caught. She's in the cells at the same time as Ru Ying, and like part of the deal that she made with Prince Colonizer is, if I serve you, protect my family, and you also let my best friend go. And he was like, I will definitely let your best friend go. And there's her best friend being experimented on. So she has to watch as they kill her through these experimentations. It's very, very unclear what's happening. They're taking her life force. It sounds like maybe she's being drained of blood, but that's kind of all that we get. And the thing that bothers our main character the most in this moment is that it's her best friend, and that Prince Colonizer lied to her. She's like, he lied to me. And her childhood best friend is like, yep, he's a liar. He's a liar? He's a killer. This genocide, eugenics. Oh my God. It honestly, it really, really made me upset that in that moment that we don't even recognize like what is going on, because like the thing that comes forward is that he lied to her. So she knows the truth now, and she goes to confront Prince Colonizer, and he starts to cry. And like, again, it's like about the deceit. The deceit is what is going on here. I will stand by that I believe you are meant to feel bad. Not entirely. Ru-Ying holds her ground and is like, this is messed up. Again, about the lying more than the like experimentation. But you're supposed to feel like we don't have the full story of like what's going on with Prince Colonizer. You're supposed to feel that he genuinely cares for her. That he has this sense of like, if we were different people, like if I weren't the prince and you weren't who you are, like we could work. That he feels pain and hurt for the way that he betrayed her. Like these are all classic sort of romantic plot beats that we are feeling. And in that final scene, you walk away feeling like Ru-Ying is like cold, and he has all of the emotions of that scene. And then ridiculously, after all of this, he just goes, but do you trust me? And she lies, yes. And he's like, oh, great. Good. Bye. Just go do what you want now, and just like lets her leave. And so she goes back to her childhood friend and is like, oh my gosh, we need to make a plan, I guess, to rebel. And that's it. Literally ends on like, we need to make a plan, and that's it. The thing with this being a colonizer romance or not, at the end of the day, to me, is whether or not like the messaging makes it clear that that is not a viable relationship or a viable love interest. That's part of it, honestly, because even if at the end you get to the point where she's like, I was manipulated and all of his feelings were fake, and those were the final two lines, you still spent the rest of the book, let's say 90% of the rest of the book, in this relationship. That was being depicted to you, was this relationship. That's where the emotional investment was, because there was so little else going on. Like the bulk of what you are supposed to engage with and feel things about is this relationship, a romantic one, between a colonizer and the colonized. And so like when people walk away from this and talk about this being a colonizer romance, I don't think that that necessarily implies that it has a happily ever after or that he's endgame. But I do think that it implies that when you are reading this book, what you are mostly engaging with is the story of this woman catching feelings for this man who is experimenting on her people. You're building up to that point of like the reveal of like, oh my gosh, he's experimenting on her people. But the thing is that the first thing we learn is about the opium, and that they're giving these people drugs. I don't need to know anything else to like have it not feel like a shock that they're experimenting on these people. But okay, they're giving these people drugs. He tells her, there is a line in the book where he outright says, we experimented on your people and this is what we found. And it's just completely glossed over. And like no less than 2 other times there's like mention of experimenting on her people, and it just isn't engaged with. And I don't know how, I don't know if we're, I don't know, like how can she heard it and she just like let it go. And so when we get to the end and the thing that she feels betrayed by is the lying, that doesn't actually feel like it's saying anything negative about the relationship. Even if she were mad about the experimentation, the fact that like the thing that got her in the end was that and not all of the rest of what comes with colonizers doesn't give me a clear enough message to say that this is not a colonizer romance. I don't feel convinced that this was well thought out. I don't think that it was thoughtful about the way that it purposefully tied real histories to things and then didn't think about like the story it was actually telling. I don't think that it was thoughtful about like the main relationship that this showcased, which if down the line that changes or endgame is different for this book, the main relationship that it showcases is Anthony and Ruying. So I don't think it was thoughtful about that. I do think that that's what it wanted to do more than anything, was to like do that chemistry and do those two characters and like make them interact with each other, because nothing else in the book felt like it had the spotlight. Nothing else was particularly well built. The world, like nothing else was like being brought forth the way that that relationship was being brought forth. So I understand all of the original criticisms that people had in their reviews of like seeing this and feeling like, I genuinely, I mean this so seriously, that like by the end of this I felt kind of sick about like what I was reading, and not in a way like, I don't want, you know, people to read this and be like, well, I was expecting, like it was just like a slowly building dread. Like I thought we would get to the end and I thought it would be more firm or take a more firm stance about this man who committed these atrocities, and it more felt like it was giving us more reasons and excuses. Like he was an orphan, he had a hard start in life, he's got these scars on his back that we saw, his grandfather is a terrible man, he doesn't have a good relationship with his brother, he told us over and over again that he's trying to do good and that all of these things. And so we got more about like laying the groundwork for what could be a redemption, maybe, I don't know what's going on, but there is enough groundwork that there could be. And so like that, the fact that we got more of that than we got like actually looking in the eyes like all of the violence and the atrocity that this like used as set dressing, truly upset me by the end. And I don't know, like I kept pushing myself because I wanted to do this review, and late last night as I finished I was like, was it worth it? It was interesting to talk about, it was interesting to read with my Discord. I really did not have like a single good time reading it. Again, I want to be clear that harassment of any type is not acceptable, and it shouldn't be acceptable within our bookish communities, and that I don't wish any harm or ill will on the author of this book. But I also absolutely understand where a lot of the criticisms of this work come from, and I would love to talk to you guys about it. If you have read this book, if you plan on reading this book, like the portions of it that you saw being talked about in the bookish community, let's chat down in the comments. I put up with a lot in my comments. My friends are always saying like for me to sort of filter and moderate more, but I like whatever. I kind of let it roll off my back. I engage with people back and forth, but this is like one comment section that I'm not putting up with it. I'm especially not putting up with anybody coming in to talk about like reviews like they are harassment, and I'm not going to put up with any authors engaging with this like I'm not doing it. So I'd love to talk to you about it, whether or not you agree or disagree with like my read of the book itself. If you read it and loved it, if you read it and don't think it's a colonizer romance, all fair game. If you're here to talk about negative reviews as harassment, or if you are an author, like not the space for you, but thank you for the view. That's it for me today. Thank you so much for watching this video, and I will see you guys soon. She is wounded and she's kept in, a, what's it called?